ladies and gentlemen, that was just, hopefully that's woken you up. There were 3 Leopard tanks there going around the arena. 2 of them, the first 2 that were on, were kindly donated to us by the Canadian Army. They were going out of service in Canada, and we asked nicely, and they were very good to us, and they actually gave us 2 Leopards. Then the Canadian Army went to Afghanistan and realised it still needed tanks. They were going to be the last tanks the Canadians were ever going to use. Afghanistan proved them wrong, and they bought more Leopard tanks, but very thankfully for us, they didn't actually ask for those 2 tanks they'd given us back. So we've got them still here at the museum. And the other Leopard tank was actually one of the original German Leopard ones that was given to us by the German Army. And if you're a real Leopard tank fan and get very nerdy about these things, inside the museum we've actually got a pre-production Leopard. And why the Leopard's so good and so important, it's really the tank that the Germans made after World War II. And you'll be seeing later this afternoon the Tiger going round, and the Leopard was a dramatic departure from that philosophy of German heavy tanks at the end of World War II. The Leopard, they decided to go for lightweight tank, speed, so they put a massive great MTU diesel engine in the back of the tank, and they thought speed on the battlefield would be a better defence than just thick armour. And they got a great gun on the tank. It's a British L7 105mm gun, tremendously accurate, tremendously powerful. So the Leopard was a great seller. Lots of countries bought the Leopard, and even some of those countries that are now selling their Leopards off, other countries are now buying them. You'll see Leopard tanks are now appearing in South America, all sorts of places around the world. So we're very pleased to have such a selection of a really important post-war tank here. Now, we'll have about a 5-minute break, and then something to stagger you all again.
Swiss tank, a Panzer 61. Looks like any other tank when you first examine it, but if you look closely at the Panzer 61, you can see there are various differences. One problem the Swiss had was that they never knew which side their country was going to be invaded from, if it was going to be invaded. So they needed a tank which was easily transportable by rail, and had to make a profile of the tank to suit the railway tunnels they had to go through. You can see it's made of castings, it's a turret and hull, within in Switzerland. It's powered by an 8-cylinder MTU diesel engine driving the rear sprockets. And one of the odd things is that the fuel tanks, luckily it's diesel, are wrapped around either side of the driver, which would make you very uncomfortable if it wasn't diesel. And that's armed with a 105mm gun. The tank that's following it is really a tank destroyer. And that is to say it's a lightly armoured vehicle mounting a pretty hairy gun which can take out other tanks. It's a general idea that seems to have fallen by the wayside lately, and the ACAVP was probably the last of the two tank destroyers. It's powered by a Volvo Panzer engine and mounts a 90mm gun. But it has a characteristically very low profile. It's also fully amphibious, which you need if you're in Sweden, where that tank comes from, because half the country seems to be flooded. But it's a very interesting, very modern-looking design. But as I say, technically you wouldn't call it a tank, although it's got a rotating turret just like any other one. Because the Panzer 61 again with the MTU diesel in it. You'll notice that the turret is all cast and mould rounded shapes, which is very typical of their tanks. Switzerland doesn't make tanks anymore. They've gone over to Leopard as almost everybody else has, but for a while they had their own tank industry. They still make other armoured vehicles, but not actual tanks. They're quite expensive to build these days. Same with the Swedes, of course. They produced the ACAVP, they produced the famous S-tank, which we've got an example of in the museum, which has an adjustable suspension and fires by elevating and depressing the whole tank rather than just the gun. But again, they found them to be so expensive that they've more or less done away with them and replaced them with Leopard. So that's why Leopard is now in service in various parts of the world, even in countries that had their own tank industry once upon a time. We can't afford to do so now. Panzer 61 again has a driver alone at the front and then the 3-man turret crew, which is probably enough actually. Probably quite a bit crowded otherwise. But you found that the second man in the front of the tank, the hull machine gunner, has virtually vanished from all tanks now. He's going to take the bridge rather gingerly, I don't blame him. There we are, up and over. Whereas the ACAVP has decided to bypass the bridge, so I don't blame him here. Makes a lot more sense. The suspension on the Swiss tank is quite interesting. Normally, if you had a tank like that, you'd expect it to be torsion bar. But this is not only Rock's torsion bar. Instead of coil springs, which you normally have if you haven't got torsion bars, this has a series of Belgian washers. They're like strung washers stacked on top of one another, which act like a coil spring. Give the tank a certain amount of freedom of movement. And that suspension operates all the road wheels, so that when it goes over bumpy ground, they can adjust to pick up the bumps and so on in the ground and smooth the path of the tank out. A blue vehicle into the parade. I have to say this was the colour chosen by its former owner before it came to us. And the vehicle in question has been used by the Norwegian Army and also by the British Army. Or at least I should say the Royal Marines, to be more specific. It's what's known as a snowcat. It's completely rubber tracked and fully articulated, so that the drive, which is from the Volvo 4-cylinder engine in the front, drives not only the tracks of the front unit, but also the tracks of the back unit through a hydraulic coupling, and it means that the vehicle steers by bending in the middle. But they really were tremendous. They'd cover snowfields and they'll really drive over almost anything. They're fully amphibious, and they were really used as troop carriers or sometimes as tractors for ski troops. And they're quite unusual. They're not armoured, so you wouldn't want to go where the bullets are flying about, but they were very effective vehicles for troops needing to move over snow and over dodgy country like that. See how wide the tracks are looking at it from the front. They're all rubber, which is great fun, except when you come to replace them, and it's really hard work. And it takes a 2-man crew in the front, and the rest of the chaps all hunched together in the back there. Normally the sides would be folded up to give them a bit more air, but at the moment they all have to be closed down. Well, the vehicle directly behind the Snowcat is actually Dutch. It's a YP-408 armoured personnel carrier with a hull formation which is not dissimilar to some of the German half-tracks of the Second World War. Powered by a Bedford engine, and it drives on 6 of the 8 wheels, so it's what we would call an 8x6. You'll have come across 4x4, of course, meaning a vehicle with 4 wheels, all of which are driven. And that numerical sequence carries on right up. You can have 6x6, 8x8, or in this case 8x6, meaning 8 wheels of which 6 are driven. The others used for steering and for extra load carrying. The vehicle also has a sort of commander's position, top right, which is also a machine gun position. It has sides that fold up to protect them. Next in line again is the Cougar, which is based on a Swiss Moeg design, powered by a Chrysler engine. They were actually issued by the Canadian Army and fitted with the turret from the British Scorpion light tank, which meant that they couldn't be used when we discovered that every time you fired the 76mm gun, you caused a health hazard, so they had to do away with that. The last vehicle in that lineup is an Urutu, which is built by the Brazilian firm Engesa. And the Urutu came in various types, mainly as an armoured personnel carrier. Carried a crew of 2 with 13 infantry, but you could also have, like this one, various turreted versions with different combinations of armament in them. This and the Cougar, they're both 6x6. The Cougar's driven by a Chrysler engine, the Urutu by a Mercedes-Benz engine. And we also have a Cascavel armoured car in the collection, which is the 6-wheeler, the armoured car version of the Urutu, which is, they make an interesting pair actually. We don't get many armoured vehicles produced in third world countries, but Engesa decided to go in for armoured vehicle production. That particular vehicle was captured during the 1991 Gulf War, so it once belonged to Saddam Hussein. There's no further use for it. That's going around, that's following the Cougar. The Cougar is part of the design firm Moeg, a Swiss firm, who produced a range of 4-wheel drive, 6-wheel drive, 8-wheel drive, and even a 1.10-wheel drive armoured cars. And they really are quite an interesting range of vehicles. The last vehicle is quite an oddity, and that's an oddity amongst oddities, I can tell you. We call it the plastic tank. It isn't a tank, and it isn't really plastic, it's made of polymers. But it's an interesting example of the extent that a British industry went to develop vehicles for military purposes. It has no, it wasn't a prototype of anything, it had no progenitors at all. It was only designed to test out various ideas of hull construction. It uses mainly warrior parts, the 30mm rod and turret and top. But the hull is what it's all about. It's built of polymers and resins and that kind of thing, to make it as bulletproof as it can be. But it was a most unusual, interesting vehicle. Normally those vehicles are scrapped. They very rarely survive into preservation. So we're very lucky to have that thing. even though it probably doesn't look the most attractive vehicle you've seen. It's a good example of those sort of lengths the British industry went to when it came to developing an armoured vehicle. It would have the same basic torsion bar suspension as Warrior. In fact, it was mechanically the same engine and everything else in there. But it was the outside that was really what mattered, the external finish of the vehicle, which made it totally different from most of the other AFVs you'll see. They put turrets and things like that on to make people realise it's meant to be a fighting vehicle, even though in actual fact it wasn't. When it first came down here, I remember it being photographed with big secret, and they kept it rather hidden from view, so when we got a chance to photograph it on the low that we did, it was painted black in those days. But it's now reverted to a standard military colour, though it really probably deserves to be in a slightly different shade to show you that it's not a real tank. I think he's just about done, so what I will ask you to do is put your hands together for the crews of all those vehicles. Most of them are our volunteers, and they've given up their time to come and have a nightmare of fun driving tanks for you. Thanks very much.